Welcome back. We are ready for lesson 9 of the series through the Old Testament. We're going to be looking into the life of Moses for the next 4 lessons. To begin with, I'd like to go to Exodus chapter 1. Read verses 6 down through verse 22, which sets the stage and brings understanding for what we'll be looking at today. Now Joseph and all his brothers and all of that generation died. But the Israelites were fruitful and multiplied greatly. They became exceedingly numerous, so that the land was filled with them. Then a new king, who did not know about Joseph, came to power in Egypt. Look, he said to his people, the Israelites have become much too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous. And if war breaks out, we'll join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country. So they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor. And they built Pithom and Ramses as store cities for Pharaoh. But the more they oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly. They made their lives bitter with hard labor in brick and mortar and with all kinds of work in the fields. And in all their hard labor, the Egyptians used them ruthlessly. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, whose names were Sibra and Puah, when you help the Hebrew women in childbirth and observe them on the delivery stool, if it is a boy, kill him. If it's a girl, well, let her live. The midwives, however, feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do. They let the boys live. Then the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and asked them, why have you done this? Why have you let the boys live? And the midwives answered Pharaoh, well, Hebrew women, they're not like Egyptian women. They're vigorous and give birth before the midwives arrive. So God was kind to the midwives, and the people increased and become even more numerous. Because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. Then Pharaoh gave this order to all his people. Every boy that is born, you must throw into the Nile, but let every girl live. Very sad setting. And this was the setting when Moses was born. Exodus chapter 2, verse 1 through 10 gives us the record of Moses' birth. When he was first born, his parents hid him for 3 months at home, trying to protect him, keep him away so that he wouldn't be killed. But babies grow and become noisier and noisier and cry louder. And finally, they knew they were going to have to make a change. So they came up with a plan. Now, I don't know if their thinking was quite like this or not, but Pharaoh did say, if it's a boy, throw him into the Nile River. So, well, he didn't say they could put him in a boat first. So they made a basket and lined it so that it would float. And then they, during the daytime, would put it in the bulrushes in the Nile River in the water and put baby Moses into the basket throughout the day. Then his older sister, Miriam, would watch over him. And throughout the day, she would take care of him, do whatever needed to be done. But then at night, he would be at home. But back in the day, he'd have to be back in the boat again in the little basket in the middle of the Nile River in the bushes. Till one day, Pharaoh's daughter came down to the Nile to bathe. And she looked out and she saw this basket over in the bushes. And she said, what is that basket doing over there? So she sent one of her handmaidens over to get it, bring it over to her. And when she opened it up, there was a baby. And that baby, I'm sure, began to coo and smile and just captured her heart. And so she realized this is a Hebrew baby. He's supposed to be killed. Oh, but he's so cute. Hmm. Well, Miriam, who had been watching from the bushes, came around, and didn't let on that she knew the baby necessarily or anything about it, but she comes over and looks and sees kind of the puzzlement on Pharaoh's daughter's face, and she says, "You have a problem?" She says, "Yeah, I've got a baby. I need some help with." Well, I know a Hebrew mother that could probably, well, she could help nurse him and take care of him till he grows up and everything for you. Well, that sounded like a pretty good plan. So, baby Moses got to be nursed and reared for the first few years by his own mother at the expense of Pharaoh of Egypt, the very one that was trying to kill him but didn't know it. God has a way of working things out if we'll trust him and follow him. Well, Moses then grew up as an Egyptian noble. In Exodus chapter 2, verse 11 to 14, we begin to discover a little bit about him. For one thing, just knowing the background, a little bit of what they've discovered about Egypt. Egypt, the Egyptian culture was very advanced. There's a lot of knowledge. We don't really know how much they really did know, but from archaeological finds, we've discovered that they were quite advanced. Well, Moses was trained in all of that. He had the best teachers imaginable. And we're not totally for sure, but if we have the right Pharaoh pegged in history, this Pharaoh didn't have any sons to hand down Egypt to. Therefore, it's very possible that Pharaoh's daughter's son, who was Moses, may have been in line to be the next Pharaoh. We're not for sure. All we know is that he was brought up in that society and that somehow, whether Pharaoh's daughter told him or how he determined it, but somehow when he was old enough to understand, he came to the realization that he was actually an Israelite, but that he had been adopted by Pharaoh's daughter. And so he had a natural interest in the Israelites, and he'd go out and watch sometimes while they were working. Well, one day he was out watching, and we find that he looked out and he saw an Egyptian mistreating one of the Israelites. So he went over and intervened, and in the process, he killed the Egyptian. He looked around, nobody saw him, so he hid the body and walked away and thought, well, nobody will really know. Well, sometime later, not for sure how long, he was again kind of in the area watching, and he saw a couple of the Israelite men fighting each other. And he went over and said, "Why are you fighting? Your brothers, your family. What are you right? Why would you do this?" And one of them looked at him and said, "Well, and what are you going to do? You going to kill one of us like you did the Egyptian taskmaster the other day?" Uh-oh. Moses realized what he had done had not gone unnoticed. He realized he was in danger, that his life was in danger. So he had to flee. He had to run away. Well, we pick up with him in Exodus chapter 3, verse 1, down to chapter 7, verse 13. We find that he's down in Midian. And as we begin to study the story, he goes down there, he arrives in the area, and this beautiful young lady is coming with her father's sheep and getting ready to water him, but she's waiting for the other shepherds to get there to roll the stone back. He sees her, notices her. Nobody's there yet. She's just kind of sitting there waiting. And he said, "What are you waiting for?" She said, "Well, I'm waiting for somebody to help roll the stone back so I can water the sheep and go home." He said, "Well, hey." So he rolled the stone back, helped her water the sheep. She went home. Her dad said, "Wow, you made record time today. Got home at a really good time. How did that happen?" "Well, there was this young gentleman that was there, and he saw that I was by myself, and so he rolled the stone back. And I watered the sheep and came on, and he looked like he was just a traveler passing through or something." And her dad said, "Well, why don't you go invite him to come eat with us and stay with us?" Well, she did. Well, he did, and after time, he stayed longer. He fell in love with the daughter. Her father gave her to him for a wife. He had children. He became a part of the family. In fact, if we begin to look into Acts, we get a couple little secrets. Acts chapter 7, verse 23 says, when Moses was 40 years old, he decided to visit his people, the Israelites. Saw one of them being mistreated. So when this started, he was 40 years old. He had to run away. And then Acts chapter 7, verse 29 to 30 picks up, and it talks about when he fled to Midian, where he settled as a foreigner, and he had 2 sons. And then, after 40 years had passed, an angel appeared to him. 40 years old when he has to run away. 40 more years pass while he's in Midian. He's now somewhere in the neighborhood of 80, 82 years old. We don't know, at least 80. And so, anyhow, he's out taking care of the flocks, doing what he does. And all of a sudden, he looks around and a bush burst into flame. Well, that probably didn't surprise him a whole lot because in the desert world, sometimes it's so dry that sometimes the bush will do that. You see, a lot of people don't understand. You need 3 things to have fire. You have to have the right amount of heat, you have to have oxygen, and you have to have fuel. Now, the thing of it is, if you have the right combination of those 3 items, you don't need a match or anything else. It's just going to boom, it'll burst into flame. And so that probably wasn't too abnormal out in the desert area, but it's dry. And once it bursts into flame, it burns up, it's gone. There's nothing else to burn. It's over with, right? No, it kept burning. So got Moses' attention. He began to walk over to see what in the world was going on here. How could this possibly happen? And when he gets closer, says, hey, wait, stop right there where you're at. Take your sandals off. You're on holy ground. Oh, okay. I mean, it's one thing to see a bush burn out. It's quite interesting that it's not burning up, but it keeps burning. And then when it starts talking to you, yeah, it had his attention. Absolutely, for sure. Well, God, speaking out of the bush, explains to him, I'm the God of your forefathers, the God of Israel. And they're crying out to me and they need help. And I've chosen you to go help them, to lead them out of Egypt and lead them back to the promised land where they're supposed to be. Wow, that's pretty potent. Moses' response in chapter 3, verse 11, he says, who am I? Hey, you got the wrong one. I'm not even safe there anymore. I messed up, okay? And not me. God kind of explains to him, Moses, it's not about who you are. It's about who I am. Moses says, but who are you? And who am I going to tell them has sent me? And God says, well, tell them that I am have sent you. A very unique name. Well, why? I am what? I am. You see, there's no descriptive word in human language, all of them put together even, that could truly describe the fullness of who God is. So he became I am. Now, it's interesting if you study that out. We don't have a lot of time to do a lot of study there, but it's interesting that the Hebrew language was strictly consonants only, had no vowels in it. And they later came in when they were trying to preserve the language, a couple hundred years before Christ, because they're afraid it was going to become extinct and people wouldn't know how to read it anymore. So they went back into the original text. They didn't want to mess up the consonants that were there. So they added dots and dashes below the line and above the line to signify the vowels so that they could put vowels in it so people would be able to read it in the future. Well, an interesting thing is the name that God gave for himself and the name that has been handed down to us. Well, the Israelites wouldn't pronounce it. It was so sacred, so holy, they wouldn't pronounce it. Whenever they would come across that name, they would use the name of the Lord. And so when they put the vowels in, they put the vowels in for the name, the Lord, rather than the name itself, so that they would be reminded not to actually pronounce that word. From that word, going through all the different languages, came down, we believe, to the word we know as Jehovah. Actually, probably a closer pronunciation would be Yahweh, the name of God. But what matters here is it's the name that he says describes me. I am. So when you take that, he just kind of the Old Testament using the word Jehovah, which we believe has come from it. He's Jehovah Jireh, the Lord will provide. He's Jehovah Nissi, the Lord is my banner. Jehovah Salom, the Lord is my peace. Jehovah Shammah, a phrase that means that the Lord is there. Jehovah Teshboah, which the Lord of hosts, and I mean Jehovah Elohe Israel, which means the Lord, the God of Israel. A very sacred name, which we think is Yahweh, they wouldn't even pronounce because it's so important. That's who's sending you. Moses says, wow, what if they don't believe me? I mean, I'm here talking to a burning bush and I'm having problems believing this. What if they don't believe me? Well, God says out of the bush, he says, what's that in your hand? It's a rod, my staff, I carried it everywhere I go. Okay, throw it on the ground. Okay. Ah! It turned into a snake. God said, reach down, pick it up by the tail. Okay. I don't know if you've ever been around snakes much, but I'll give you a little insight. If you go to pick a snake up, number one, make sure you know how to do it. Make sure you get it under control with something long that you can hold its head still so it can't move. Number two, when you pick it up right behind the head so that when you pick it up, it can't bend around and bite you. Okay? Especially if it's poisonous. Well, he said, pick it up by the tail. Well, Moses isn't arguing, and I know he knew better. He lived in the wilderness a lot, okay? But I can see him reach, grabs it by the tail, back to his rod again. Wow, pretty impressive. Well, they don't believe that. Well, put your hand into your garment. Okay, pull it out. Oh no, it became diseased. In those days, there was nothing to do with it. I'm sure his heart was pounding. He looked at the fiery front, the bush, and he said, "What do I do?" He said, "Stick it back in." Okay, gladly. Now pull it out. Oh wow, perfectly pure, clean skin. Oh, what is that you're carrying there? Oh, that's just my, that's some other jar. It's got some water in it. Okay, pour your water out for me. Okay, and blood pours out. That says they'll believe you. Show them the signs. They'll know that I have sent you to talk to them. Well, you'd think that would solve it, right? Nope, 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 nope. Moses says, verse 10, chapter 4, I've never been a good talker. I get tongue tangled. I get tied up. I can't talk. Ain't no, uh, verse 13, please send somebody else. Now, you would think maybe Moses has been rebellious. No, he wouldn't have grabbed the snake by the tail if he's been rebellious. Okay. But he just didn't want to go. I don't even think that was a problem. He loved his people. Remember, he had tried to help them before, 40 years before. Uh, I think personally, the answer is Moses had come to the realization it wasn't about him. He was answering from a point of humility that says, I can't do this. I've been on the backside of the desert by myself because I messed up and blew it the first time around. I can't do it. Sometimes God has to bring us to a place of humility before he can use us. You see, only then will we look to him rather than to our own resources and abilities. Moses was there. God said, okay, I'll tell you what, your brother's going to meet you when you go back, and he can be your spokesperson. I'll tell you what needs to be said. You tell Aaron, and he'll tell them. You will be my voice. He will be the one that does the talking and the speaking. Okay, so they travel on back. He meets his brother. They meet with the people, convince them that he is the real thing, and then they go to meet Pharaoh. Pharaoh says, absolutely not. I'm not getting rid of my workforce. Shows the signs to Pharaoh. Pharaoh still being obstinate, not going to let it happen. No way, Jose. But you see, God wasn't caught by surprise. He knew Pharaoh would react that way. He had already planned for it and had a plan to actually use Pharaoh's obstinate stubbornness. Okay, you see, God wanted to prove, first of all, to Israel so that they would have no reason to doubt him and they would know that he was truly God. Secondly, God wanted to reveal to Pharaoh and Egypt so that they would know that there was only one true God. And God was going to use all of this, even to the point of supplying Israel with all that they needed in order to build his temple and get started. You see, Numbers 33:4 says that those that were burying all the firstborn whom the Lord had struck down among them, for the Lord had brought judgment on their gods, and he was putting it in a place that he would show them all these things and provide for Israel at the same time. So we believe that these plagues, every one of them, were directed at a god of Egypt. From archaeology, it would seem to prove this. For instance, first one, the Nile was turned into the blood. Guess what? The Egyptians worshiped the Nile River as bringing life. They worshiped it. The second plague was a plague of frogs 7 days later. You think, well, frogs? Yeah. Well, they had a frog goddess who was Hiki, the frog goddess. And accidentally killing a frog, that was worthy of death. Oh, no. Finally, Pharaoh calls for Moses. They get the frogs out of the road. Then the dust of the ground turns into lice. What? Yeah. They believed that the very dust of their land was supposed to be sacred. Even the magicians, up to this point, they had been able to imitate and reproduce the signs and wonders. But all of a sudden, this time, they couldn't do anything about it. And they recognized that this was the hand of God, that Pharaoh, he still hardened his heart and wouldn't let them go. So God sent a plague of flies. According to chapter 8, verse 20 to 32, this was an object of Egyptian reverence. They referenced a fly. Well, fly is pretty awesome if you study it out. But at the same time, when it was everywhere, they were tormenting them. Except the area of Goshen, where the Israelites lived, none there. Pharaoh hardened his heart, breaks his promise, won't let him go. He promised he would. He won't. Changed his mind. So then we have the death of livestock. And Apis, the bull god, supposedly dwelt in a sacred bull. And whenever that bull would die, the whole city would go into mourning until they could find a replacement with identical markings. So all of these bull gods start dying all over the place, and they're all mourning. And that is except for the livestock of Israel. Nothing happened. Pharaoh hardened his heart. You would think, but no, Pharaoh's still not going to let him go. No way. So Moses comes, throws handfuls of soot into the air, boils break out upon man and beast there. And this represented their human sacrifice to the evil principle, where they would gather the ashes, they would throw them in the air, and it's supposed to turn evil aside from everywhere they landed. Well, it didn't turn it away. In fact, everywhere it hit, boils began to break out, including the magicians that had to get out of there. But Pharaoh hardened his heart. Then hail. Well, they had two deities of water and fire that were supposed to protect Egypt from this, Isis and Osiris. Pharaoh asked Moses, he said, please pray for the end of the hell. I promise I'll let Israel go to worship your God. Moses says, okay, but I know you're lying. He prayed. God took it away. Pharaoh wouldn't let him go. So plague of locusts came. Well, again, Isis, now along with Serapis, another god, was supposed to protect the country from this type of a plague. Pharaoh offers a compromise. Well, I'll let so much go or this much go. Moses says, no, it's everybody, everything, all the way. No compromise. Finally, Pharaoh says he'll help. He'll, okay. And he asks Moses to pray for the removal of the locusts. They disappear. They go away. But Pharaoh doesn't let them go. So God sends a plague of darkness. You see, Pharaoh was considered to be the son, S-O-N, of the son, S-U-N. Another compromise. Now, finally, Pharaoh gets mad, tells Moses to get out of here and don't return again. Moses says, you won't see me again. Why? Because he knew there was only one more plague to go, and he wouldn't be seeing Pharaoh when it was over. He was right. The last plague, the Passover plague, the final decisive plague. Interesting, because this celebrates the time of the Passover, which was a prelude picturing the death of the Passover lamb, which was Jesus Christ, which we celebrate at Easter. The time that we celebrate the death followed by the resurrection of the Passover lamb, which brings life. This was a final plague that allowed the children of Israel to leave, even as it is the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ, when we accept and believe, that will one day allow us to leave this world and to go to the next one. They left Egypt. Exodus 12:33-36 says the Egyptians urged the people to hurry and leave the country, for otherwise, they said, we're going to all die. So the people looked through they took their dough that they'd made, they hadn't put the yeast in it, they carried it on their soldiers, and then verse 35, it says the Israelites did as Moses instructed and asked the Egyptians for articles of silver and gold and for clothing, and the Lord, he made the Egyptians favorably disposed towards the people, and they gave them what they asked for. So they plundered the Egyptians. Literally, they got paid for 400 years of service. Paid with what would allow them then to do what they needed to do. What's the message it keeps all the way through here over and over? Well, I think it's summarized in Exodus 20, verses 2-7. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol in the form of anything in heaven above or earth beneath or waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the fathers to the third and the fourth generation of those that hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those that love me and keep my commands. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord God will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. There's only one God. That's what God was showing all the way through. These others, they're not gods. There's only one, and we must come to him. Well, even today, we have false gods. I think of another passage this time, the New Testament, Matthew 19, verse 24 starts out. Matthew 6, verses 19-24. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moth and rust do not destroy, where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are good, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? No one can serve two masters. Either he'll hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. Notice the last phrase. You cannot serve both God and money. And it's not just the money. It's anything that replaces God. You see, God requires and demands first place. You say, well, he's kind of egotistical. No, he's God. He's the only one that deserves worship and honor and glory because he's God. That's who he is. And the only way that we can be restored eternally is through worshiping him as God. He must have first place. Matthew 6:33 says, seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and then all these things will be added to you as well. But the secret, we must make him the crosshairs of our sight. We must make him the focus. We must make him our God, and we must worship him and honor and serve him. Don't allow anything, whether it's money, possessions, whether it's a church, a denomination, a teaching, a teacher. I've even seen people put the Bible as God. I love God's word, but God's word isn't for me to worship the Bible. It is his word so that I will know him and I will worship him, so that I will get my eyes on him. It is his truth that's revealed so that I know how to do that. I study it, hold it close, but I worship the one that gave it. I've seen people worship faith. Oh, faith is important. But what is faith? Well, we talked about that under the lesson of Abraham. The purpose of faith is to realize faith is in Jesus Christ. It is in who God is. And that's where my faith rests. You see, when we begin to put all this together, it's interesting. According to the Encarta Dictionary, the third meaning that it gives for God is this: something that dominates, something that is so important that it takes over somebody's life. Here's my personal definition: a God is the object of supreme devotion. Who or what feels your thoughts? Who or what fills your devotion? Who or what fills your attention? There is no other God but the Lord God Almighty. Let him be the focus of your heart, your desire, all that you have. He and he alone is worthy of being God. Worship him, honor him, and he'll always be there for you. God bless you.